The outdoor recreation program at McMaster University's Department of Athletics and Recreation has grown quite significantly over the last 25 years since I led a few outdoor trips. A lot has evolved since then and has added to our programming, from the creation of the outdoor club to doing online or courses for outdoor rec certification, to getting the Alpine Tower and doing team building and leadership programming for schools and university groups and sports teams, to acquiring the climbing wall. We got our new building, and did outdoor orientation programming for first-year students, and now most recently doing natural lands and conservation work. The growth and development of the outdoor recreation program has really been due to the ideas and passion and commitment of several hundred McMaster students and alumni who've contributed immensely to the success and growth of the program. And I'm really happy and excited to be joined by three McMaster alumni who made very important contributions to the outdoor recreation program, and they're going to share some of their experiences since they've moved on from the university and graduated, and they're all doing wonderful things. So maybe a few introductions to start. I'm joined by Steve Javorski, who's out in Nanaimo, BC.
Hi, everyone.
Steve? Yeah. And also Maya March, who's working up in Georgian Bay area.
Hi, everyone.
And also Kyle McLoughlin, who's up in Guelph, Ontario.
Hello.
So maybe we'll start with you, Kyle. What have you been doing since you graduated from the university? I know you've been doing lots of great stuff.
Yeah, so after leaving McMaster, I got into the trade of arboriculture. So originally I thought I wanted to be a guide. I really enjoyed being a guide, but as Steve and I have discussed, and actually Maya and I have discussed, and Wayne, you and I we've all discussed this at length, being a guide was a wonderful thing while at McMaster and as in the summers, but then you get to a point where, at least for me, I wanted to transition out of it. Part of it was really tough for me. And so I found my way into arboriculture, which is kind of crazy because it's significantly harder and some would say almost masochistic in the difficulty of the trade. But I started an apprenticeship, and then I ended up getting my ticket as a professional arborist, and I've trained now in the United States. I worked in Australia. My experience in Australia was absolutely life-changing. And now I run my own business, and I've worked for some pretty high-profile clients and have some pretty cool projects under my belt. And it seems to be going really well. Today I climbed a massive tree for a client to prune, to manage for risk. And I was in the tree for 8.5 hours, pruning some pretty massive pieces of wood and dealing with the crew and managing that. And I love what I do. Absolutely love it.
Yeah, Kyle, you said, I know you did some work up in Ottawa. What were you doing up there?
So when I started my business, which is Ironwood Arboricultural Solutions, when I started Ironwood back in 2017, when I came back from Australia, I bid on a federal contract for urban forestry management and consulting in Ottawa, so that what we would call the National Capital Region. So that covers Ottawa, Gatineau, and the green spaces around that. And so that was managing clients, that was managing risk, managing trees. So emerald ash borer is a really big, at least right now, is a really big invasive species. And part of that has been dealing with it in places like around Parliament and the Governor General's residence, managing the risk there, and then also in the green spaces and the trails, going through assessing for risk, assessing ash trees, getting rid of those trees, and watching the process from assessment to removal to replanting all the way through. And I've walked, and Wayne, you and I have talked about this, every single green belt and green trail in the National Capital Region, from Ottawa to Gatineau and into some pretty deep places in Quebec, that everywhere the federal government manages. And that was part of that contract. Just wonderful.
Well, Kyle, that sounds amazing. I know you've been doing a lot of consulting, and we've even had you do some work for the university on our natural lands, McMaster Forest, and that was very much appreciated. Steve, you're out west now.
It was a blast.
What led you out to BC?
Well, I guess after I finished up at Mac, I transitioned into wilderness therapy, and I went and did a master's in wilderness therapy at Naropa in Colorado, and then came back to BC to work in a wilderness-based program in the juvenile justice system, and then had the chance to go and do start my PhD in outdoor ed with a wilderness therapy specialization with Mike Gass at the University of New Hampshire. And after I'd finished my comp exams there, there was a job posting in the child and youth care program at Vancouver Island University, and they were looking for someone to do to sort of take on redeveloping their activity-based counseling classes. And so I sort of jumped on that. I've always wanted to live on the island, and this was a great way to do it. So now I'm a full-time professor in the child and youth care program, and I teach sort of introduction to activity-based counseling, therapeutic applications of wilderness, which is using expeditionary canoeing for therapeutic interventions. My penance for that is I also teach the research methods and stats courses. And I'm a practicum supervisor through the Center for Community Outreach and Care, where we connect our third-year students with a community member who's identified a service gap, and they sort of interview the children, youth, and families they'll be working with over the course of the year to find out what they're interested in, then design and deliver programming. And a lot of that draws heavily on things we did at altitude with the sort of team building type stuff. So I love it out here. It's been great.
Yeah, Steve, I know I talked to a lot of students at McMaster, and especially the ones who are interested in outdoor recreation, and they often wonder what great careers, and I often mention what you're doing with adventure therapy, and I know it's a growing field and opportunities there. Any recommendations for students at McMaster?
Yeah, this is, I learned that this field existed from taking Bob Henderson's canoe course and followed up with it. And it really is a growing field. I'm still fairly heavily involved with the National Association of Therapeutic Schools and Programs, the Outdoor Behavioral Health Care Center. I help them track or manage their client outcomes and risk management databases. And I think, coming straight out of undergrad, if you're curious, there are quite a few companies in Canada and the United States that offer wilderness therapy interventions. And with the search that you get out of the Outdoor Club, you could go and be field staff for them. And I'd recommend doing that for summer to see if you like it. I think going the full therapy route, what we've been, I guess the way I got into it was I dual trained myself as a field guide and a therapist. Because that was just the only way to do things at the time. That is real time consuming and real expensive. I would say if you want to go and be an adventure or wilderness therapist, don't worry about finding a specific adventure or wilderness therapy program, and don't worry about being the guide yourself. Learn, get your clinical skills through whatever master's program, whether it's social work or counseling. Make sure that you're comfortable in whatever field activities you want to participate in, and then find a guide and sit down with them and let them sort of manage the physical risk while you manage the emotional behavioral risk.
Great. That's very good information, and thanks for recommendations, Steve. I know it's a very exciting field, and we do a lot of that, and no matter what we do in outdoor recreation, just being on trip is just a therapeutic experience for everyone involved. and everybody comes out feeling stronger and more engaged and happy. Everything is good. So Maya, I know you've been several interesting places in the last few years. You want to tell us a little bit of those stories?
Maya, you got to unmute yourself.
Of course. Thank you. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yep. Hi, Maya.
Yes. So after I graduated from after I graduated from Mac, I actually stuck around and worked for the outdoor recreation program with Wayne for a couple of years. And so it wasn't just while I was in school doing my degree. And I'd say that my degree, I have a degree in philosophy, which is a degree that I use every day in terms of rational reasoning, even historical context for a lot of the stuff that society goes through. You learn about through philosophical history. I also took courses in commerce, courses in Indigenous studies. I took a very wide range of courses at McMaster, courses in earth studies and geology and hydrology, things like that. Everything. It's just incredible how you don't realize how a course that you take as an elective really ends up contributing someday. You're working on a project somewhere else and you're like, I have a background in this and I took that course at Mac. And it's kind of incredible to see how all those disconnected pieces might come together in unexpected ways. But after I left Mac, I moved up north. I've always had a really big passion for the north, and I lived in the Northwest Territories for the greater part of the last 7 years. And I work for Parks Canada now. And it's pretty incredible, the adventures I've had. I know I was directly hired. A big part of that was through my experience at McMaster, working for outdoor recreation. People management skills, problem solving skills. It's incredible how transferable so many of the skills in outdoor recreation are related, and that all of those skills become so transferable into your everyday work as an adult. It's really, really incredible and profound. So yeah, I don't know. I think about it almost every day, how much Mac has helped me and contributed me in my journey moving forward. And outdoor recreation was a huge part of that, not just my classes.
So Maya, tell us about Tuktukton Gate, working up north.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, sure. I worked as a park manager for a really remote national park right on the edge of the Nunavut Northwest Territories border and the Arctic Ocean. So it's one of the largest national parks in Canada. I think the 8th largest, maybe. Absolutely huge. It's larger than Wales, to put that in perspective. And in some year, 2017, which was the 100th year anniversary of Parks Canada, a really, really big deal. We had 1 visitor. So, that's where parks were getting millions of visitors, biggest visitation ever. We're so remote. But it was incredible. That park, it was set aside to protect and manage the caribou calving grounds for the blue-nosed west caribou herd. It's spectacular wilderness, and it's cooperatively managed with the Inuit people who hold that land under their land claim. So it's an amazingly beautiful process where the federal government and the local Indigenous culture, the Inuvialuit, which are the Inuit from the Western Arctic, sit down at a table. It's very similar to Haida Gwaii, and it's consensus-based decision-making, which is very, very powerful, and make sure that all voices and minorities are heard, and so that the park is managed in a way that is acceptable to Canadian people and the federal government, but also very much so for the community, and that it benefits the community, and that the ecology and the traditional values are respected, and it creates something much more beautiful than the federal government would do on their own in a lot of ways. So yeah, it was an incredible experience. I was up there for about 5 years. Now I've transferred back down and I work at Georgian Bay Islands National Park. So
what are you doing in Georgian Bay now? Kind of similar stuff, I think.
I'm a product development officer. Pardon?
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm a product development officer. Yeah, I'm a product development officer So that's really working at the visitor experiences. So anything, if a person comes to a national park, anything from the signs you see to the way the trails are laid out, any visitor plaques, any programming we might do, services we offer to the visitors, they all need to, you know, I work to try and make the visitor experience within a national park the most comfortable and best experience it can possibly be for every single Canadian or international visitor who comes to our parks. And obviously that was, my ability to do that was hugely influenced by how much work I did at McMaster, leading trips to all different environments, working with tourism and hotels, and understanding the tourism industry so well by planning and leading trips through outdoor recreation. Really, I think I'm able to do well at my current job now because I worked for outdoor recreation.
I know I have quite a few trip legacies at our outdoor club, including the Grand Canyon, which was your brainchild, and you created the first trip, and I was fortunate to co-lead that with you. And it's a trip we do every year, every 2 years.
Fortunate that you let us do it. Yeah.
Well, it's a great place to visit, and we're very proud to be able to offer that. It's a epic, legendary trip. So I can't thank you enough for all you contributed.
But there's so many other trips. You know, Steve led trips out to Panorama, and I know that there's trips being led now. I saw down in Big Bend National Park.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's a car. I probably shouldn't talk right now, but from that, so many trips, they just compound, and people plan trips, and your ability to give people leadership opportunities, Wayne, and to really develop their own skills is such a gift to the students who you work with. I don't know how I would have gained the experience I had if I hadn't been working for you in your program.
Well, I'm extremely proud to have worked with you and call you a friend and keep in touch with you. And I'm really looking forward to seeing you very shortly.
All of you guys.
Yeah.
That's very well said, Maya. It's absolutely true. I mean, I think that for me, a lot of my experience that's taken me where I am. My undergrad was really nice, but part of Wayne's leadership in teaching me how to be a leader has helped me immensely in my professional career. It really has.
Yeah.
And Steve, and
I would agree.
And Kyle, you were instrumental in helping us do a lot of our nature interpretation work with the leaders doing local hikes. You want to speak to that and maybe what you did when you contributed so much to our nature side of things as a staff and a volunteer? Do you want to speak a little more to that, Kyle?
Sure. I mean, it's hard to, I don't know if you're setting me up for this, Wayne, but it's hard to really comment on that without saying how you would put me on that path. Because I was, I think at that point, I was the person at the tower, at the Alpine Tower, that was really into that. You know, we would get tons of groups and we'd have to take them on walks. And at that point, nobody really knew what to talk to them about. It's like, oh, we're going to go on a nature hike. I was like, well, what the hell are we going to talk about on the nature hike? And nobody knew. And I was like, well, we might as well figure it out. And interestingly enough, part of this came out of a talk that I saw at Mac from a philosopher named Derek Jensen, who talks a lot about pedagogy and nature and the influence on civilization and our outlook on humanity and the world we live in. And for me, it was really about looking at what grows in our environment and learning the important plants that grow in our environment and why they're important. You know, learning how we can eat and how we can live, and teaching the kids about that, and actually seeing how much, you know, when you're in school and you're stuck at a desk and you have to, I don't know if kids look at overheads, but a slide from a PowerPoint and of the plant cell, like that, there's no connection there, there's no meaning. But then when you have a group of kids, whether they're 5 kids or 30 kids, and you're actually showing them a plant and you're saying, like, this is something that you can eat, like this is something that can literally sustain your life, that goes a really long way. And I don't know, I mean, for me, like, now it's interesting because in my industry in Ontario, I'm actually relatively well known for my knowledge on fungi. I'm really into the and really into the biomechanics and physiology of trees and fungus. And it started when I started guiding, and it was a matter of, okay, well, I hated plants when I was 19. Hated plants. I had no interest in trees. Trees were boring. I wanted to paddle, right? I just wanted to do cool stuff. And then I started with someone teaching me poison ivy, right? Like, learn the poisonous plants. Don't step in poison ivy. Don't eat pokeweed. Watch out for stinging nettle. And then through altitude, Wayne, you had actually cultivated this really interesting point where it was like, okay, well, let's actually look at what else there is. And then learning about the edible wild plants was so fascinating, that there were these plants that I could just pick and then I could eat them. And teaching the other altitude staff, and then taking it to the next level. And for me, once I had actually left Mac, looking at what fungus was. And I was at this interesting point where it was like, oh, okay, well, Wayne put me on, the outdoor rec department put me on edible wilds and learning the wildflowers and what grows, but then getting onto fungus. And now it's incredible. Like, you look at it's like being on a compass, or looking at a map with a compass, and you've got 5 degrees of difference. And that little bit of difference has put me on such a far off track in thinking about nature and learning about how all of the pieces fit. It's incredible. And I don't know where the department has actually gone with that, if people are still keeping up with edible wild plants or survival skills or anything like that. But it's a lot of my bread and butter. And frankly, there's not a lot of people in my industry, because we're relatively industrial in one sense, that people might know trees, but they don't know a lot about fungi, which has given me a real edge. And when I walk onto a client's property, I can point out all of their weeds that are growing on their property that they hate, and be like, you can make wine out of that dandelion over there, or you can roast coffee out of that chicory. And they're like,
yeah,
oh.
I've been making dandelion jelly and dandelion honey the last couple of weeks. It's incredible. Just like picking dandelions out of my lawn, and I'm making medicine, and it's so delicious. And
that's it. That's exactly right. No, and I was actually talking to my father-in-law about spruce tip jelly, and how my friend who lived in the Arctic made a mint off of that stuff. And this is exactly it. It's like, it's incredible what is actually out there and how few people even know it. And going into my professional life and having all of these awesome skills in my back pocket, it's given me an edge that I would never have looked for, but I now have, and I'll never not have it, because it's given me this thirst for knowledge. There's an endless amount of plants to learn in our country, let alone on this continent, and it's so fun.
Yeah, Kyle, I know you've done a lot of things there, and I think that's where you got your tree information. So, Steve, you spoke a lot about your leadership skills, and you were very helpful with the altitude program. Could you elaborate a little on that?
Yeah, well, I think, I really enjoyed my undergrad at McMaster, but it was being involved in outdoor rec and altitude where I think I actually learned the most, much like both of you have talked about. And I think having the opportunity to help manage staff and learn how to provide training that's useful, and working with the corporate training side of things, as well as the student development and working with the at-risk kids. And I think that year I was working after I graduated was the first time I had the chance to sit down and help with full curriculum development for a grade 10 outdoor education class in Westdale. And it really opened my eyes. I think, and I don't think this is an uncommon thing, but from high school, our guidance counselors basically were like doctor, lawyer, teacher, or trades. And that was what they had to say. And so through spending some time with Bob Henderson and with Wayne and the whole outdoor rec crew, it really opened my eyes to the possibilities of what you can do for a career, not just a job, but a solid career through channels of outdoor recreation. And I think that's all that experience leading really helped me. After I left there, when I was doing my master's degree, I had the opportunity to work for the National Outdoor Leadership School out of their Yukon branch for a couple summers. And then when I was at when I was working with young offenders in sort of central BC, that leadership experience came in real handy. And like, how do you manage conflict and real aggressive conflict? And then when I started to do my doctorate, I with Mike Gass and Anita Tucker and some other folks at the University of New Hampshire, they have the Brown Center for Innovative Learning, which is a massive, Wayne, you'd love it. Well, Wayne actually came out and got to see it. It's like at its peak, it had about 75 element challenge course. But yeah, that was great there. So it's like, I feel like the skills that I learned and really started to hone in McMaster, I've been able to apply in every sort of phase of my career along the way. And like the logistics of running that September Algonquin trip, Maya, like that's a lot of people. And then because I'd done that, I was able to get a summer position the first year I was in New Hampshire, running outdoor orientation for 650 kids out on 65 simultaneous trips. And I wouldn't have been able to do that without all the things I learned at Mac. And now here, I think, Wayne, what I really appreciated most about your leadership style was that you were you left room for us to be really self-directed and find it, and didn't micromanage. And I think that has served me really well transitioning into post-secondary system, where basically they're like, here's a 50-word course description, fill 13 weeks. So yeah, so I wouldn't be where I am without my experience at Outdoor Rec.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Steve, and thanks, Kyle, and thanks, Maya. I know I've learned immensely from all of you, and you've all been an inspiration. As I said, you've been instrumental in all we've done, and your legacy is very strong. And I know I speak often to the current students about some of the things you've done and the things that we've had grow. So thanks for taking the time to share your stories. Okay? Thank you, guys.